What up, what up, what up? Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The White Flag, a podcast to help you get off that endless treadmill of spiritual exhaustion to find joy and rest with Jesus. I'm your host, Jonathan Moynihan, coming to you from right outside of Baltimore, and this is our 49th episode. Crazy. 49. It's wild. Which means next week, obviously, what comes up from that is 50. Next week is our 50th episode, and I put a little something about this on social media earlier, but I want to make sure those of you who are tuning in right now, for a 50th episode, I want to do something a little bit special where I make you, the listener, an even more integral part of the episode. So what I'm doing is I'm asking everyone who tunes in and uses this platform to help create practices that help them grow in intimacy and stillness with Jesus in a variety of different ways. I'm asking those of you who listen to send in some questions so I can do a live Q&A episode next week, May 12th at 2 p.m., so that we can just have a really fun conversation. And so what we'll do is I'm going to get questions from you throughout the week. You can DM me, jonathan.moynihan on Instagram, or contact me at the website, jonathanmoynihan.com. Just hit the hit me up button and send it my way. But I'd love to get some very practical questions from you about maybe tensions you navigate, things you're not sure about, ways you want to improve in your spiritual disciplines with the Lord. But I want to receive those over the span of a week. And then at 2 p.m. next Thursday, I'm going to go live answering some of those and then just have an interactive dialogue with those of you who are able to tune in online through Instagram. So that's something we're doing. I would love for you right now, even just to make a note before the episode's over, to send me a question, DM me something, because I want to do something a little different to celebrate 50 episodes. We've been doing this for over a year. It's been crazy. Those of you who are tuning in, obviously hearing this, you are a huge part of what's made this thing work. And to the hundreds of you who tune in every week, thank you so much. It's such an honor. It's so weird to think that someone's listening to this right now as they walk their dog or go to the gym or drive to work or, sit in quiet after their kids get on the bus. Like, it's just a real treat and a real honor. But I would love to have you be a part of next week's episode, a rare Q&A with me just about these things. And yeah, that's what I want to do for next week's episode. So please go ahead and do that. Maybe even pause the show now, send me a quick question, and then hit me back. Now, for this episode, though, we're not done. We still have something great to talk about today. As you may know, because you've been following along for almost a year now, this whole show, the White Flag podcast, was birthed from this sense that there were some significant flaws in the modern evangelical ministry model that ultimately led people to an incomplete and ultimately powerless faith when it came to their walk with Jesus. And I'm not saying Jesus is powerless or that faith itself is powerless, because obviously our faith is in Christ, but there are many of us who are sort of implicitly conditioned to just get stuck in this rhythm of faith where we would maybe go to church and maybe attend a small group sometimes or read one verse in the Bible and think that that was the fullness of what it meant to walk with Jesus. And what many of us found in 2020 was that didn't produce the fruit of the Spirit. It didn't produce the yoke and the burden that Jesus promised us, one that is free and light. And so it's led many of us to wonder either Jesus' promises aren't valid or I'm doing something wrong. And so this sense is just really one of the big reasons this show was birthed into existence. And so sort of deconstructing one of the ways that this flawed ministry model has affected us, there's a lot of them we talk about on the show, but one of the flaws of modern day evangelicalism is that we're implicitly taught that truly spiritual things are precisely that, spiritual. We're kind of taught that the physical self is not very spiritual, that someone who really is spiritual is someone who can access their head and their heart and their soul, and they just kind of retract into themselves, and that's what being a really spiritual person is. And obviously we care deeply about those things. I mean, much of my guided meditation episodes are just you sitting there, listening and praying and talking to God. And so obviously leveraging your heart and your mind and your soul are essential when it comes to developing a rich and robust inner hidden life with God. The problem arises, my criticism of sort of widespread Instagram Christianity or modern day evangelicalism, my critique is that unless you are explicit in saying that a spiritual life isn't just what's going on inside of you, if you don't actually speak out against that, that's all people are going to receive. And like I said, obviously we care deeply about the inner life, sort of that invisible, unseen self that operates within your own emotions and your spirit and what you feel. The problem is we do a great disservice to how we view faith, and we do a great disservice to ourselves if that's all we view our walk with Jesus to be. Because Jesus prescribes faith, not just as our heart and our soul and our mind, but also our strength. And this is so important because there is a tendency to restrict our spiritual selves to be the non-physical. I mean, I feel that tension all the time. I'm sure I haven't done a great job of communicating how our physical bodies are part of this spiritual equation of growing into the likeness of Jesus and inviting God to move in our lives. You know, I'm guilty of just kind of honing in on that inner self all the time. But again, if that's all we do, we are going to miss out on a key way that God can utilize one of the most core things about us, and that is our bodies. And I want to dive in a little bit here on how our physical bodies impact and relate to connecting with Jesus and taking on practices of courageous surrender. And I want to talk about this because I think there's something about seeing our bodies as an integral part of connecting with the Lord, because it's going to release us from some of that self-imposed pressure we put on ourselves when we just can't seem to get still. I would kind of call this modern-day Gnosticism, if we aren't careful, because Gnosticism was a 1st and 2nd century heresy that was kind of circulating among the early church, where people believed the flesh is all bad, you know, the physical form in itself is all bad, and the spirit is what's truly good. And they kind of viewed that like we all had bodies, but they weren't inherently good. And there's even this Gnostic belief that Jesus didn't actually have a physical body. He was just fully spirit because the flesh is bad, you know, sex and lust and dirt and uncleanliness and all these things. Like this heresy was that our spiritual selves are purely good, but our bodies are purely bad. But that was a heresy that Paul spoke out against. If you read scholars talk about the letters of the New Testament, Gnosticism was a heresy that Paul was constantly railing against because Jesus taught that there was going to be a physical resurrection of the body, not just for himself, but even for us one day. And so the fact that the physical body is resurrected in the end, as you read in Revelation, that shows that the physical body isn't inherently bad. So Gnosticism can't be right. So anyway, there's a little bit of a early church history for you. But the thing that all of this comes down to is that Scripture teaches we don't just have bodies that we discard one day. We are a body. Like our body is an integral part of what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to connect with God? And so if nothing else, for the remainder of this episode, if nothing else, I want you to hear me say that the times when your body can't sit still, that doesn't mean that something's wrong with you, or that doesn't mean that you can't be spiritual. I actually want to unlock some things so that you can see your body as a key aspect of stepping into the spiritual even when you can't sit still. And even further, thinking about ways of how we can use our body to help us step into spiritual practices instead of viewing our body as the hindrance that keeps us from being spiritual. Because let's be real, I have close friends of mine who love the show, who want to lean in to, you know, monastic rhythms and lighting a candle and watching it burn for a while. But there are just times when you can't sit still. So much is going on inside of you, or you had too much caffeine, or you're just distracted, and you're just the neurological makeup of your brain prohibits you from sitting still for long periods of time. I think if I'm not careful, if I don't talk about this explicitly, someone might hear me or hear the show and think, I just can't sit still, therefore I can't be spiritual. But there is this author named Pete Greig. He wrote this book called How to Pray, A Simple Guide for Normal People. And there's a section of a chapter that he wrote that I've hung on to for a while that I've never talked about, that actually sets me free when I am in those seasons where I just can't find myself being still. And he talks about leveraging the body as a way to connect with God, and even what happens in our own neurological makeup. So it even explains a little bit why it is that doing something physical actually can help you come to be at rest, even if your body isn't. So this isn't like a Jonathan original. This isn't some sort of crazy hot take. What I want to do is just read to you a page from this author, Pete Greig, and kind of let his words speak for themselves. And the whole why of this is I just want to comfort you, those of you who beat themselves up when you feel like you can't be still. and you grade the quality of your faith because you struggle to have silence. There are obviously great benefits to this. That's why I harp on it so much about being still and silent. I think most of us operate at a pace and posture that we could lie to ourselves and say, oh, I just need to be moving in order to connect with God. But the truth is, you are just so uncomfortable being at rest that reveals things you need to get curious about. What I want to do basically is read a page or two from Pete Greig and just kind of let the words speak for themselves, and let this be a time where, coming out of this episode, you release yourself from, like I said, that self-imposed pressure. Just constantly be still and grade your spirituality based on that, and realize that in the moments when you can't get still, use your body as a tool that God has gifted you so that you could, in your spirit, come to be at rest. Because even runners talk about, that flow state, or swimmers or athletes. You get in that flow state where your brain almost can go offline while your body actively moves. And there's some really interesting things that Pete Greig outlines here that I think convinces me that there are absolutely times when your body is not at rest, but your spirit is, because you are leveraging your body to be a tool for leaning into Jesus. So I'm just going to read what Pete wrote and kind of let it stand by itself, and give you some closing thoughts, and we'll be done. But here's what Pete Greig writes in How to Pray, A Simple Guide for Normal People. He talks about, wanting to be still, take a deep breath, breathe in, speak to God slowly, and then when the distractions come, just repeat that process and just be quiet with God, and it's all great. But then he says this, listen. He says, occasionally, none of this works. Sometimes I am too wound up to find inner stillness in any of these sedentary ways. When this happens, I will instead use physical exercise to burn off a little adrenaline and calm my mind. It's a shame that so few of the experts on prayer have ever acknowledged the importance of movement and exercise for those of us who are active learners and external processors, at least 50% of the population. In fact, most of the classic texts on prayer go to great lengths to advocate the exact opposite, describing in detail how to sedate our bodies and shut out all external physical distractions in order to center our senses on Christ. I used to worry that there was something wrong with me because I found it nigh impossible to be still, to switch off my brain, and to sit in silence for any length of time without getting distracted or falling asleep. I would often find myself pacing around prayer rooms, talking out loud. I seemed to prefer to draw a picture, however badly, than to imagine one. I often wanted to pray out loud, not in my head, and with other people, not on my own. This embarrassing inability to achieve something as straightforward as sitting still and doing nothing for more than a few minutes made me feel unspiritual, doomed to be bad at prayer, certain that I was missing out on some higher echelon of divine encounter. But then a school teacher mentioned that many of his pupils processed information kinetically, that is, by doing things actively rather than sitting at a desk passively. I met athletes who said they found it easier to connect with God while cycling or running or swimming rather than sitting still with their eyes closed and their hands together the way they'd been taught in Sunday school. I met artists who wanted to paint and sculpt and carve their prayers, dancers who needed to move, musicians who chose to drum or rap their prayers. I began to realize that serenity does not always have to be silent, cerebral, solitary, or even static. Stillness can be active. In fact, recent medical research has discovered that exercise can be more effective than sitting still as a way of calming the brain, diffusing stress, and stimulating clarity of thought. I'm not saying that stillness is unimportant. It is vital, as we have seen and discussed. But as your blood pressure increases in the first 20 minutes of exercise, a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is released to repair your memory neurons. Meanwhile, the activity in your brain increases to improve concentration, and endorphins trigger a sense of calm and even euphoria. It seems to me that such physiological effects can be gifts of God just as much as other more conventional contemplative approaches. We know that Jesus himself often prayed actively. On one occasion, he drew in the sand. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he threw himself on the ground. He clearly loved to climb, and I simply don't believe that Jesus hiked up so many hills early in the morning and late at night merely to get a nice view and a little peace and quiet. I'm convinced that he prayed as he walked, sometimes no doubt with sweat on his brow, his lungs panting, and his heart pounding. It's an extraordinary thought that as he hiked the heights of Galilee, this chemical, BDNF, was sharpening the mind of Christ. Endorphins were mingling with the blood of Christ, and exercise was enhancing the communion of Christ with his Father. That's so good, man. It's so good. And the whole purpose of this episode, the reason I titled it, Help, I Can't Get My Body Still, or whatever I called it. The whole purpose of this is to give you a green light to learn how you could actually come to be at peace in your spirit while your body is moving. Now, again, I would want to resist and push back against that temptation to just say, oh, I don't know how to be still. I can't be still, so I'm just going to always talk to God while going for a run. I don't think that's beneficial. In the same way that certain people are really good at loving God with their mind, need to learn how to love God with their body, there are people who are really good at loving God with their body, but they need to learn how to love God in their spirit, in their soul, in their mind, in stillness. And so, again, the Holy Spirit's going to nudge you on if you need to zig instead of zag, or zag instead of zig, however you want to put it. But, man, what an opportunity to give yourself freedom to realize that if you've been struggling trying to adopt some of these practices, don't give up on them, but give yourself permission to see how God might want to bring you peace and rest and internal stillness while your body is at movement, or in movement, while running, while walking, while going for a hike. I have dear friends who worship God deeply while they're in the woods going for a hike. And I don't really relate to that fully. I'd rather worship God with this incredible gathering of people and prayer and music. But I don't negate the fact that the Spirit is equally at work in them as they do something physical, as he might be at work in my life when I just stare at a candle in the darkness of my morning. So that's it. Brilliance from Pete Greig. There you go. I'll link to his book in the show notes. But hey, if you need help because your body can't be at peace or be still, maybe this is an opportunity to start to pursue God in movement and see how that helps your brain. See how those endorphins and chemicals fire so you actually have clarity of thought and clarity within your own spirit so you can connect with God better. So let me know. Let me know if you go exercise and connect with God better this week. I'd love to hear that. Hit me up, jonathan.moynihan on Instagram or my website, jonathanmoynihan.com. Both will be in the show notes as well. But that's it, guys. I'm actually just sharing with you wisdom from somebody else. Hope that's okay. And don't forget, shoot me a question for our Q&A next week, our 50th episode. It's a huge deal. Would love to have you be a part of it, so hit me up. And yeah, that's it. Deuces.